What's going on, folks? Phillip G here. Welcome to Midweek Study Hall. And so, Midweek Study Hall, for those that are new here, is really an offshoot of our weekly Bible study. And both of them are built off of the text in Matthew 6:33, where the Bible tells us to seek ye first the kingdom of the Father and his righteousness, and all things shall be added unto you. So, our opportunity to do that is through these meetings. We gather to see, seek, and serve the kingdom of the Father. All right. And so this is midweek, but this is our midweek study hall where we gather during the week and kind of continue the conversation. We're in a season where we're doubling up because we're working to get through the text as with the instructions of the Father in this year. All right. So for all those who are new here or who didn't catch Sunday, I'm going to link the video down in the description below so you can go back and catch the previous part. But today we're continuing our conversation in the book of First Samuel. And so in the book of First Samuel, we will be looking at chapters 13 through 24 today. We started on Sunday with chapters 1 through 12. You can go, kind of catch up there if you want to do that. All right. And so let's get started on chapter 13. And so in chapter 13 of First Samuel, so we remember the beginning of First Samuel where the father has transitioned, is transitioning the people from a season of leadership to a new season of leadership where Samuel, he was a judge. When we saw the introduction of Samuel, his conception and birth and all those things. And then we ultimately see Samuel's sons being the catalyst for the children of Israel desiring a new king or desiring a king, period. They no longer wanted the father to be their king. And so then we see the introduction of Saul, chosen by the father as the first king of Israel. And so that's just a little background. And now we're getting a little deeper into Saul's story and Saul's reign as king of Israel. So let's move into chapter 13. And so chapter 13 begins by telling us that Saul, he's reigning as king, and he's been reigning for about a year or two at this point in time, or reigning for a period of time. And he amasses an army of 3,000 men. And of these 3,000 men, 2,000 of them are staying with him in Michmash, and 1,000 of them are with his son Jonathan in the city or region of Gibeah. All right. All the rest of the soldiers that he had on standby, all the rest of the people that were able to serve in the army, he sent them away to their respective cities. And during this time, Jonathan went out to battle against the Philistines in Gibeah. So they are fighting. The Philistines and the Israelites at this time are fighting back and forth. They are under the oppression of the Philistines. And so they're just battles back and forth and war back and forth during this season. And so Jonathan goes to battle out with the Philistines and he defeats them. And when the Philistines heard that Jonathan has overcome them and they've been defeated in this battle, they get upset. They're a little furious, and they decide that they're going to come up to war against the Israelites. Saul hears the success of this battle as well. He also hears that the Philistines are coming up against them, and he sends out a cry throughout or a message, or however you want to say it. The text says that he blew the horn, but he sends out a message throughout the entire land, telling all the army to come back, to gather back, because they are going to war with the Philistines. And so the Philistine army gathered, and just to give a little background on kind of what was going on or how big of a deal this was, the text tells us that the Philistine army had gathered together for battle, and they brought 30,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen, and soldiers as numerous as the sand on the seashore. So think about that. The children of Israel are seeing this type of army standing opposing them, ready to infiltrate them and overtake them. And the text tells us that the Israelites are scared. They are so scared when they see the Philistine army that they run into hiding. They go and hide, okay? And so about this time, Saul is down in Gilgal, and if you remember Gilgal was mentioned by Samuel over in chapter First Samuel chapter 10, I believe, when Saul is anointed privately king, and then And then Samuel tells Saul what's going to happen the rest of the day, and then some time after that, he tells Saul to go down to Gilgal and wait 7 days for him, and then they're going to bring an offering to the Father together. So now Saul is down in Gilgal. He's remembering what Samuel has told him. He's doing his best to be obedient. He's waiting. He waits the 7 days, but during that time, Samuel does not come down to the city. And so when Saul sees that Samuel isn't there, he takes matters into his own hands and decides that he's going to be disobedient. He decides that he's going to be disobedient, and he offers the burnt offerings himself. All right. And right after, the text tells us that right after he finishes offering these burnt offerings, Samuel comes down and approaches. All right. And so let's look and see, let's read their interaction. We're going to start reading in 1 Samuel 13, chapter 11 through 14. And I'm reading from the King James Version. And the text says this: And Samuel said, What hast thou done? And Saul said, Because I saw that the people were scattered from me, and that thou camest not within thine appointed days, and that the Philistines gathered themselves together at Michmash. Therefore said I, The Philistines will come down now upon me to Gilgal, and I have not made supplication unto the Lord. I forced myself therefore, and offered a burnt offering. And Samuel said to Saul, Thou hast done foolishly. Thou hast not kept the commandment of the Lord thy God, which he commanded thee. For now we would that the Lord would establish thy kingdom upon Israel forever. But now thy kingdom shall not continue, for the Lord hath sought him a man after his own heart. And the Lord hath commanded him to be captain over his people, because thou hast not kept that which the Lord commanded thee. All right. And so we see going on here, Samuel comes down and asks Saul, like, hey, what's going on? What are you doing? Why did you do that? Why did you not keep the instructions that I gave you, ultimately that the Father gave you through me? Saul says that, hey, I know you said you were coming, but he felt all this. He felt all of this pressure from all these different places. The people, his army has been scattered. He only has a very small remnant of this army left. The Philistines are coming up to war against him. This huge army is like in a very close city to him. During this time, he was assuming that the Philistine army would get closer, would come to the city that he actually is, and he didn't want that to happen without him having sacrificed to the Father. And the text says that he forced himself, which means that he took matters into his own hands and offered a burnt offering to the Father and ultimately disobeyed the instructions. And Samuel tells him, because of this decision, because of his disobedience, now the Father has removed the kingdom from his bloodline forever. From him and his bloodline forever. And so if you have been around here any point in time, you know that I say this all the time. Our decisions that we make do affect positively or negatively our descendants and those that are members of our bloodline. And we see that here. Now Saul's bloodline will no longer carry the kingdom leadership ability or title because of decisions that Saul made, and the Father took the kingdom from him through his disobedience. And so after this, Samuel leaves, he departs for a season, and Saul returns back to the war with the Philistines. He counts out his soldiers, and he only has 600 men left with him. As the Philistines are advancing towards Israel, the text says that the Hebrews didn't even have weapons for battle because there was no blacksmith in Israel. I'm not going to get too deep into that, so let's move on into chapter 14. So while all this is going on in chapter 14, Jonathan decides that he's going to break away from his father. Saul, at this point in time, is laying down under a pomegranate tree with these 600 men. Jonathan breaks away, and he takes his armor bearer with him, and they decide to go infiltrate the Philistine war camp. And what they're going to do, their plan is that they're going to infiltrate this camp. They're going to expose themselves. They're going to let themselves be known to the Philistines, or the leaders of that area. And then, depending on what they say, they will know if the Father has delivered them into their hands or not. So they do just that. They go over, they infiltrate the camp, they make themselves known. And the Philistines actually welcome them in and say, hey, come, let us show you something. And when they heard that, they received the sign that they were looking for from the Father to attack them. And so now Jonathan and his armor bearer attack this Philistine war camp, and they kill all of the 20 men that are there. The text says they killed 20 men that were there. And so When that happens, when they kill these men, when they are successful in this mission, the Philistines go crazy. They just begin to turn on each other. They're running around in chaos and just mass panic. And the text says that they began to fight and kill each other. All right. When the Israelite watchmen see this going on in the Philistine camp, and it happens so quickly, what they do is they tell Saul and all of the army, these 600 men, they jump up and they rush into battle because they're using it, as an advantage. They're taking the advantage of the opportunity. The Philistines are already in chaos. They're already fighting each other and killing each other. Let's just go and overcome them. And that is what happens. But during this whole time period, what we see is that Saul's men that have been hanging out with him under the pomegranate tree, they are tired. They are weary. They're exhausted. They are weak because Saul made a decision at the beginning of that day to curse anyone who ate that day. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure what he was looking for. I don't know. Maybe let me know down in the comments. But Saul said that, hey, no, we're not going to eat, and anyone that eats is cursed to die, essentially. And so, they're chasing the men are fighting. They're chasing the Philistines. They're tired, and they enter into this wooded area, and the wooded area was so fruitful that the text says that there was honey falling from honeycombs in the trees and just landing on the ground. And the men of Saul still did not partake of any of the food. They were being true to the word that Saul had said, and they knew the power of words. And so Jonathan, who was off on this secret mission, did not know what Saul had said. So he takes some of this honey and he eats of it. The soldiers didn't tell him what his father had said. He rebukes his father and says that, and kind of tells the soldiers like, hey, how much more successful could we have been if you guys had been able to eat and you had strength and had the ability and all of that. And so when it was finally time that they were able to eat again that evening, the text says that they were so hungry that they ate their food, the cattle, the goats, and all that stuff. They ate them without draining the blood, which was disobedient. This was not in alignment with the law that the Father had set out for them. The blood was always supposed to be drained, and blood was never supposed to be consumed by Israelites. And so not only has Saul hurt the soldiers by causing them to fight in a weakened state, but he also had caused them and led them astray to a place where they are now disobeying the laws and commandments of the nation given by the Father. And so as we get down towards the end of the chapter, what we see is that the Saul is asking the father whether they should go down after the Philistines. Some of the Philistines have fled, so he's asking them like, "Hey, should we go down after the Philistines?" And the father doesn't answer him. When the father doesn't answer him, Saul knows that something is wrong, or he assumes that something is wrong. And the text says that they began to cast lots to see who had committed a sin. And casting lots, I've heard it kind of likened to like dice, but it's not really like that. So what they would kind of do, it's kind of like dice. Let's say you had dice with your name on it. And so what they would kind of do is they would just inquire. Let's just say it this way. They would inquire of the father as to what was going on, and the father would highlight certain things or certain people and bring those things to the forefront. And that's essentially what's going on here. The Saul asked through casting lots, he says, "Hey, please highlight to us who is guilty and who's innocent." So the guilty ones are noted as Jonathan and Saul. And then once again, he asks who's guilty between us two. Jonathan is one that's noted as guilty. And then Saul asks him what he's done. And then Jonathan tells him that he ate some of the honey. And at that point, Saul doubles down on the fact that Jonathan must die because of the vow that he made. And we've seen in previous studies that the vows and the words that we speak are very powerful and are expected to be kept by the Father, and by the law and by the statutes, and I don't want to say law, the statutes and commands that he's given to govern his people. And so ultimately, Jonathan did not get killed because the soldiers stepped in and wouldn't allow Saul to kill him because of how successful he had been and how integral he had been to their success in that day and in that advancement with the war. But the chapter finally ends just telling us a little bit more about Saul and how once Saul had really stepped into his role of leadership as king of Israel, he fought against the enemies all around him. The text even tells us that he was at war with the Philistines all the days of his life. And let's move into chapter 15, okay? So chapter 15 begins with I titled this chapter Saul getting another chance at obedience. But chapter 15 begins with Samuel reminding Saul how the father sent him early on to anoint him king over Israel, and how now he has some more instructions for Saul from the father to complete. This is the part where I'm like, he's getting him another opportunity. And so, what the father instructs Saul to do through Samuel, he tells him to go up and fight against Amalek and completely destroy the people, the Amalekites, because the father remembers what Amalek did to Israel when they came out of Egypt. And so, this is something where I want to kind of stop and talk about this for a second, because think about this: the father is now paying back or pronouncing judgment on the people of the Amalekites for something that they did hundreds of years before. The children of Israel haven't been coming out of Egypt for a number of times. They've been in the promised land. They've gone through judges. Now they have a king. They've gone through multiple seasons since that point. But the father did not forget. He may have spared them for a while to the opportune time or his desired time, but he didn't forget. My note said, but he ain't forget. So I want us to remember that, and I want to highlight that for you. There are things that have happened throughout your life, but the father hasn't forgotten. And so, you know, justice or vengeance or judgment may not look the same way it looked for the Amalekites for what happened to you. But the father hasn't forgotten. He hasn't left you. He hasn't forgotten, and he is still there. And he's keeping a record of what's going on. And in due season, he will make sure that things are settled, okay? And they're going to be settled the way that he wants it to be settled, not the way that we want it to be settled. So let's keep going. Let's look at 1 Samuel 15, verses 2 through 3. Verse 2, thus saith the Lord of hosts, I remember that which Amalek did to Israel, how he laid wait for him in the way when he came up from Egypt. Now go and smite Amalek, and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass. So the instructions here, in my opinion, seem very much straightforward. Go up to war and don't let anyone live. All right. But Saul, don't let anyone or anything live from this region, this territory of this people. But Saul did not follow the instructions of the father. When the battle was over, he took the king Agag, who was the king of that region at the time. He took him alive, and then it says that Saul and his soldiers saved the best of the sheep, the fatlings, the lambs, and everything that they felt was good. They saved those things for themselves and brought them back. Let's be clear about something. This is all that they thought was good. Saul and his soldiers, they did what they thought was good. They kept what they thought was good. That is not what the father said. And we must be intentional to be obedient to the instructions and not what we think is the best way to handle the instructions. We see that here. Samuel, the father speaks to Samuel after all this happens, and he repents. Now, he's giving Saul this chance. He's giving him another chance, and Saul still doesn't do right. He still is disobedient. And the father speaks to Samuel again, and he repents for ever making Saul the king. Let it not be said of us. But the father repents for this, and he said, because Saul has turned back from following him and has not kept the commandments. He's not kept his instructions. He's not been obedient. He's not been humble. He's not been yielded. And do you want that to be said of you? Do you want that to be said of you? I don't want it to be said of me. I don't want to be like Saul. And my prayer is that would not be said of us, okay? And so Samuel's grieved by what he hears the Spirit of the Father saying, and he comes up to Saul and confronts him. But in Saul's mind, as they're having this conversation, Saul feels like he did what the Father said, and he blames it on the other people that were there. So let's look at verses 13 through 17. Because I don't want you to believe me. I want you to believe the text, okay? And so Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said unto him, Blessed be thou of the Lord. I have performed the commandment of the Lord. And Samuel said, What meaneth this bleating of the sheep in my ears and the lowing of the oxen which I hear? So he's saying, Oh, you did that. Why do I hear animals hanging out with you around here? And Saul said, They have brought, who is they? They have brought them from the Amalekites. For the people spared the best of the sheep and of the oxen to sacrifice unto the Lord thy God, and the rest we have utterly destroyed. Then Samuel said unto Saul, Stay, and I will tell thee what the Lord has said to me this night. And he said unto him, Say on. And Samuel said, When thou wast little in thine own sight, was not thou made the head of the tribes of Israel, and the Lord anointed thee king over Israel? So we see here that Saul and Samuel are having this conversation. And Saul, he seems to believe that he has done what the father has asked him to do. But even then, he says that the people, now these are the same people who didn't eat. Hear this now. These are the same people who didn't eat honey because they were afraid of the word that Saul had said. They were that loyal to the words that he had spoken. These are the same people. And now he's saying that these same people, did something against what he told them to do. That doesn't make any sense now, does it? And we have to pick up on those things. And so now, even though Samuel is reminding him of this, Saul just isn't getting it. He just isn't getting it. And then Samuel gives him this rebuke, and starting in verse 22, we're going to read 23 to 26. And Samuel said, Hath the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. So this is where we get the saying, if you've ever heard somebody say obedience is better than sacrifice, because Saul thought that it was better to be disobedient and bring something to sacrifice to the Father instead of being obedient and not having anything to sacrifice to the Father. So obedience is always the precedent, is always the elevate or the highest portion that you can give to the Father, that we can give to the Father, obedient to the commands, to the instructions, to the vows, to the agreements, whatever it is, we must be obedient. Okay, let me keep going. For rebellion, which is disobedience, is as the sin of witchcraft. So disobedience and witchcraft are synonymous here, according to the text. And stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because thou hast rejected the word of the Father, he hath also rejected thee from being king. And Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned, for I have transgressed he has sinned, and he has transgressed the commandment of the Lord and thy words, because he feared the people and obeyed their voice. So he was a people pleaser. He wanted his people to be happy, and he obeyed them. They didn't obey him. Now therefore I pray thee, pardon my sin, and turn again with me, that I may worship the Lord. And Samuel said unto Saul, I will not return with thee, for thou hast rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord hath rejected thee from being king over Israel. So Samuel cut Saul off. Saul is trying to make some, halfway kind of repentance or halfway plea for help. And Samuel just doesn't buy it. He said no. He said no. The Father has already made his decision, and I'm going to be aligned with the Father and not aligned with you. And all of this is happening. Why? Because of Saul's disobedience. All right, but his disobedience we see here, at least in the second portion, in the one with the Amalekites, his disobedience has been fueled by his fear of people and his desire to please the people. So fear of people, fearing the voices of men, and also desiring to please the nature of men will get us into places and spaces where we should not have been, and potentially get us off of the path that the Father has for us. All right. So we have to be obedient to the Father, not the people around us. And as Saul leaves, Samuel leaves. I keep getting Saul and Samuel mixed up. But as Samuel leaves from the presence of Saul, now Saul is crying, is asking him to stay and all those different types of things. And he grabs on the Samuel coat or his outer garment and he tears it. And Samuel tells him, just like he tore the coat, the Father has torn the kingdom from his hand and he has given it to someone better than him. And then Samuel goes and kills Agag himself, completing the assignment that Saul was ultimately given. Isn't that just like a gangster move by by Samuel? We sit and talk about the priest, and like how priests should act these days and how men and women of God should act these days. But we see here that Samuel wasn't having it. He told him, like, just like you told this, and that's how the father did you. And he kept it a buck with him. So let's read 34 and 35 as we finish up chapter 15. Then Samuel went to Ramah, and Saul went up to his house to Gibeah. And Samuel came no more to see Saul until the day of his death. Nevertheless, Samuel mourned for Saul, and the Lord repented that he had made Saul king over Israel. So we see now, as we move into chapter 16, that chapter 15 ended, and Samuel's sad. He's mourning because of Saul and what has kind of happened in his position with the father, how he's lost this position and stature with the father. But as chapter 16 begins, what we see is that the father asked Samuel, he asked him, how long are you going to mourn for Saul, who he has rejected? And so this teaches us that there are times where we can continue to connect and grieve over things that the Father has ultimately moved away from, and it's time for us to move away from them as well. All right. He then tells Samuel to go to Bethlehem to the house of Jesse and anoint one of his sons to be king. So the father is literally moved on. He's sending a messenger to anoint the next person king. Samuel and him have some dialogue, some back and forth, because he's like, hey, what if Saul hears he's going to try to kill him, and he's like, hey, just tell him what's going on. And so Samuel agrees and heads to Jesse's house. Once he's there, he sanctifies Jesse and his sons, and the first son he sees is the eldest, whose name is Eliab. And Samuel sees him, and he's like, oh, surely this is the one who the father has chosen. But it wasn't. So this teaches us something, at least it shows me something, that think about how close someone as Samuel was to the father. Samuel has served in the father's house before his presence all the days of his life. We remember that with Hannah. Hannah gave him to the father. He lent him to the father, as Eli has said. And so Samuel's been in the father's house all his life. He's been in the father's presence from a very early age. Samuel was the shift in seasons from where now they were hearing the voice of Samuel was hearing the voice of the father when the word of the father was rare. Samuel was seeing the vision of the father when visions from the father were extremely rare. And so this is that Samuel. This is the same Samuel. And what we see here is that Samuel still looks at a person and sees the fleshly desire, sees the fleshly presentation, and can get caught up in that. Okay, so that's something that we need to just be mindful of, that we aren't Samuel. We can also get caught up in the fleshly presentation of things and the fleshly worldly presentation of a thing and completely miss what it is the Father is actually trying to do. And we see that here. And because the father tells him, like, no, that's not who I've chosen. We can't go with the outer appearance. So let's look at verse 7 in chapter 16. But the Lord said unto Samuel, look not on his countenance, or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not as man seeth, for the man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. And Samuel's probably also, just to kind of back him a little bit, Samuel's probably also thinking about what the Lord chose the last time with Saul. Saul was head and shoulders above all the other people. He was tall, he was good looking, and he probably saw a lot of those same traits here in Eliab. And so Jesse continues, so that this is Eliab, and his father's like, no, it's not him. Jesse continues bringing his sons before Samuel one by one, and the father continues saying no. And so Samuel eventually asked Jesse if this was all his sons, and he tells him that there's still one left. And let's look at verse 11. Let's keep going. And Samuel said unto Jesse, are here all thy children? And he said, there remaineth yet the youngest, and behold, he keepeth the sheep. And Samuel said unto Jesse, send and fetch him, for we will not sit down till he come hither. And so this is I don't know, maybe it's just me. Maybe you have a better understanding of this. If someone such as Samuel comes to your house and says, hey, I want to see all your children. Why aren't all of your children there, Jesse? Was David considered that insignificant to him that he didn't even consider him as a son or as a child to be brought before the priest who's asking to see all of your children? And so that is the type of environment that David was growing up in. And I don't know if it was like harmful or anything like that, but we do see that at least in this instance, David wasn't even invited to the ceremony that was about him. And that was his father's doing. That wasn't some other random person's doing, or his brothers, or one of his, like siblings that could have been being mean. No, this was his father, whose job it was to put him in the best position to align him with the father's instructions and command and design for his life. And here we see that the father has an insignificant position for him. May we be better as fathers and parents. All right, let's keep going. And so when David comes in, the text says that he's a handsome kid, but he's still small and ruddy. And the father tells Samuel to arise and anoint him. So no matter what all he looks like, arise and anoint him because he's the chosen one. Let's look at verses 13 and 14. And Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brethren. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. And so Samuel rose up and went to Ramah, but the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, because it was on David now, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him. So some translations don't say evil spirit from the Lord. It says a troubling spirit from the Lord. And we can talk about this. Please let me know down in the comments what your thoughts are about the evil spirit from the Lord. Like, does the Father actually send out evil spirits, or is this something that he just allowed to happen? And so from that point forward, the spirit departed from Saul. The spirit of the father departed from Saul, and this tormenting spirit would come upon him. And the final part of this chapter, I don't believe happens in is presented to us in chronological order, but we'll talk about that a little bit. We don't have to get too deep into it, but it goes on to tell us that when this spirit would come upon Saul, his servants sought out someone who could play the harp, because they found by some way they found that the harp would cause these spells to go away. And so someone recommends David, and then they send for David, and David becomes Saul's armor bearer, and Saul loves him greatly from that point. And we see that. Let's look at 1 Samuel 16, verses 18 through 21. 18. Then answered one of the servants and said, Behold, I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, that is cunning in playing, a valiant man, a mighty valiant man, and a man of war, and prudent in matters, and a comely person, and the Lord is with him. Wherefore Saul sent messengers unto Jesse and said, Send me David thy son, which is with the sheep. And Jesse took an ass laden with bread and a bottle of wine, a kid, which is a goat, and sent them by David his son to Saul. And David came and stood before him, and he loved him greatly, and he became his armor bearer. All right. So there are a few things here why this may be just out of chronological order. I believe it happens after the things we're going to talk about in chapter 17, after David fights Goliath. But one of the questions I had is, it says that he's a mighty valiant. In verse 18, it says that he's a mighty valiant man and a man of war. How would they have known that David was a man of war? If David was the rules at the time stated, the laws, the commandments at the time stated that they had to be 20 years old to be in the army. So he couldn't have been a man of war because he wasn't 20 years old. And we see that when he fights Goliath, he is younger because he's not a member of the army at that point in time. We'll get there, but that's just a few other things. So it's just, how did they know these things? How did they know that he was a mighty man of war? How did they know that he was a mighty valiant man? And if this is in chronological order, because ultimately we don't know, we weren't there. If it is in chronological order, how did some random person know these things about David that his own parents did not know and appreciate? Because why would you know these things about him and leave him out in the field and not bring him in to be potentially considered by the priest at the time? All right, let's keep moving in chapter 17. And so chapter 17 begins by telling us that the Israelites and the Philistines were at war during this time. We know that they were at war the entire time that Saul was the king. And so they're at war during this time. They had set up two camps on opposing mountains, and there was a valley separating them, the valley of Elah, I believe. And so twice a day for 40 days straight, there was a warrior of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, who would come out and taunt the Israelite army. And due to his stature, his reputation, and the fact that he was a descendant of the giant, so he's huge, the Israelites were afraid of him, and no one was willing to go up against him. So they would just let him taunt them. And then this is what he would say according to verses 8 through 11 of chapter 17. And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel and said unto them, Why are ye come out to set your battle in array? So basically, why y'all coming out to fight me? Am I not a Philistine, and ye servants to Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. If he be able to fight with me and to kill me, then will we be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall ye be our servants and serve us. And the Philistine says, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. So we see that Goliath is coming out and making these type of statements to them twice a day for this period of time. And we've seen previously, previously in our studies, that 40 days typically identifies like a season of testing or a time of testing, a period of testing. And so during this time, David is not a part of the army, according to the text, and his father sends him to check on his older brothers and see kind of how things are going with the war. David's older brother, it says his three oldest brothers at least, were soldiers in the army, which means that they are older than 20 years old at minimum, according to the law, the commandments. And so since he was the youngest and he wasn't a soldier yet, he was still with his father, keeping his father's sheep as a shepherd. And so Jesse sends David with some food, some nourishment for his brothers and for their leader. And then when he gets there, he hears this foolishness, this vitriol that Goliath is spewing out against Israel and ultimately against the father. And David is provoked to action. And David asks around and he starts saying like, hey, he started asking who is this guy? Like, why he's talking like that? What's going on? And then he hears that there's a reward. So he says, hey, what is the reward going to be for taking him out? Let's look at verses 23 through 25. And as he talked with them, so David here is talking, behold, there came up the champion of Gath, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words, and David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him, and were sore afraid. And the men of Israel said, have ye seen this man that is come up? Surely to defy Israel is he come up. And it shall be that the man who killeth him the king will enrich him with great riches, and will give his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. So, basically, he asked these questions, and David hears what's going on, and then they tell him that whoever defeats this man, these are the things that he's going to get. The king is going to give him riches. He's going to get to marry the king's daughter, and then his father's house, so his family will be free in Israel from probably taxes and different things like that, and maybe even service. Maybe not service in the army though, but So anyway, let's keep going. His older brother is upset. He's hating on him. He's mad that David's down there. He's tried to discourage him. Talks about he belittled him. Talk about he only got a few sheep and all this different type of stuff. But David still, kind of lets that stuff roll off his back and determines that he's going to fight Goliath and he's going to kill him. He even goes up and tells Saul that he's going to do this. Now, if David had already known Saul, wouldn't he have known what's going on here? Like, wouldn't he have known David? Why would Saul be surprised when he saw David? He would have known who David was, and we don't get that type of interaction from them. And so David comes up and tells Saul why he's gonna go up against the Philistines. Saul immediately tells him why he can't go fight this guy, and so David comes back with receipts. He gives him receipts. So let's look at verses 34 through 37. David said unto Saul, thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear and took a lamb out of the flock, and I went after them, smote him and delivered it out of his mouth. So he took the lamb out of the mouth of this bear and lion. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and smote him and slew him. So he caught the bear and the lion by his beard or mane and killed him. Verse 36, thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and the uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. David said, moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, go, and the Lord be with thee. So David, we see very early on here that David understands that it is not him that is fighting this battle. The Father is the one that is fighting on his behalf against someone who is outside of the promised covenant. So the Father is fighting Goliath because of what Goliath is doing to his people, but also what the Goliath is saying and doing to him personally. Goliath is saying essentially that your God is nothing. And David is not going to let him do that. All right. And so Saul tries to give David some of his armor, But once he has him on, Saul says, "Hey, go ahead if you want to fight him. Go right ahead." Saul tries to give David some of his armor, but he can't. He can't fit it. He does. He hasn't. It's too big for him and whatnot. He's still a kid, and so he tells Saul that he's not going to go with his armor. He not going to go with his armor because he hasn't been trained with that armor. So he picks up his staff and his slingshot, the things that he has been trained with, and he heads out to battle. Let me pause for a second. This is important. This is a word for all of us. I'm using us because I don't want to single anyone out. All of us who try to go and copy someone else's instructions or process when the Father hasn't told you that, hasn't told us that. David could not take Saul's armor into this battle and be successful. David had to go into the battle with his armor, the slingshot and the staff. He had to go into battle with the things that the Father had given him to be successful. The things that the Father had given Saul to be successful. Number one, Saul, is disobedient, whatever. But the things that the Father has given Saul to be successful are not what Saul has given David to be successful. So success for them, even though both of them may include overcoming the Philistines, the process to get there is going to look different because one is taking an armor and a sword, and the other is taking a staff and a slingshot. So take with you what the Father has trained you with. Stop looking for other people's training. Stop trying to learn from other folks. I mean, there's nothing wrong with learning. It's not what I'm saying. But what the Father has told you to do, he needs you to do it with your staff and your slingshot and those rocks that you pick up, and not what you see someone else have. Not someone else's armor that's too big for you that you're trying to. That's why we got imposter syndrome, because you got on Saul's armor. Let's keep going. And so he heads out to the battle with the stuff that he's been trained with. Goliath sees him and is insulted. He actually says, like, some little dog, are you going to send a dog out to fight me or whatever? And then he begins to curse David by his false gods. And David fires right back and tells him exactly what he's about to do to him. Let's look at verses 45 through 50. Then said David to the Philistine, Thou comest to me with a sword and with a spear and with a shield. But I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. He did not mention the staff. He did not mention the slingshot, because he wasn't fighting him with weapons. He was fighting him with covenant. Okay, let's keep going. Verse 46, This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee, and take thine head from thee, and I will give the carcass of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air, and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with sword and spear, because that's what he had. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. And it came to pass when the Philistine arose and he came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistines. So David is running to the battle. Some of us, I'm talking to myself right here, some of us need to run towards it. We don't need to walk towards it. We don't need to sit towards it. We need to run towards it, like run full steam ahead towards the giant. Let me find my place. Yep, verse 49. And David put his hand in his bag, and took thence a stone, and slang it, and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine and slew him, but there was no sword in the hand of David. So David didn't even have a sword. He was able to knock the Philistine down with his in the forehead with one of the rocks in the slingshot. Then David takes his own sword and takes Goliath's sword and cuts his head off. The Israelite army see this, they spring into action, and they go full-on attack onto the Philistines. And at this point, the chapter closes out with Saul asking his captain of the army, which is Abner, I believe, Abner, asking him if who's this young man's father, like who's this young man's father, assuming to make good on the promises that he made. By making a father's house free in Israel. But Abner says, hey, he doesn't know whose family he's from. And then Abner goes out and gets David and tells him brings him into Saul's presence so he could tell him himself. And we see that Saul That David tells him that he is the son of Jesse. Again, another interaction that makes me believe that what happened in the end of what's shown, was given unto us through the text in the end of chapter 16, actually is after the David and Goliath situation of chapter 17. Let's keep going. So chapter 18 begins and tells us that shortly after this conversation, so when Saul and David were having this conversation about whose son he was, shortly after that, Jonathan and David, it says that their souls were knit together. And we'll read the text in a second, verses 1 through 4. But this is the first mention, I believe. Yes, this is the first mention of a soul tie in the Bible. Now, I've heard people say that soul ties are not biblical and they are not in the Bible and all these things. But the text here literally says that Jonathan and David's souls were knit together. And when you knit something together, what is you doing? You are weaving it together and essentially tying it. And so we see that that is what happened. I don't know how they entered into this soul tie. Typically, I've heard it taught that soul ties come from primarily from physical or sexual intercourse or interaction, but I'm not sure. The text never tells us that David and Jonathan had that type of relationship. So it could be that soul ties can also be entered into just through regular relationship. Being in relationship, loving someone in a very deep way, or just being loyal to someone in a way where your souls are tied together. I could be wrong. Please, let's talk about it in the comments. So let's look at verses 1 through 4 of chapter 18. And it came to pass, when he had made an end of speaking unto Saul, that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would let him go no more to his father's house. Yeah. So anyway. So Saul took him that day and would let him go no more to his father's house. And then Jonathan and David made a covenant because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was upon him, gave it to David and his garments, even to his sword and to his bow and to his girdle. All right. So now David is dwelling, according to the text. David is always with with Saul. He's no longer in his father's house. Saul wouldn't let him go home anymore, according to the text, at least for this period of time. And so David has also been exalted to a measure of leadership over some of the soldiers after a period of time. Again, to be in this position, according to the law and the commandments, he would have had to be at least 20 years old. So there could be some timing in between this. It could also be that maybe Saul just allowed David, because of his victory over Goliath, allowed him to have a higher position in the army. But if I've tried to study this out, I couldn't find much concrete kind of consensus. Yeah, consensus. So please let me know what you guys have studied out down in the comment box below. And so let me keep going. Yeah. And so David's in some leadership position over some soldiers, and wherever David would go out, David would go wherever Saul sent him out for battle. And so after a battle with the Philistines, David is coming back, and Saul hears the ladies of the city singing a song, and they said that Saul has killed his thousands, but David has killed tens of thousands. And so Saul hears this. He hears them attributing like David this higher positioning than him, that they're elevating David above him, and he's not happy. And so from that point, the text tells us that he began to seek an opportunity to kill David. And the next day after this happens, an evil spirit, the tormenting spirit, comes back upon Saul, and David played for him like he had done, previous times, oftentimes before. And this time Saul threw a spear, says a javelin. He threw a javelin at him and tried to kill him by pinning him to the wall. David avoided it twice. So let me stop here. David is loyal, because you tried to throw a spear at me, bro. Twice in the same hour, same night? No, not gonna happen. After the first one, I'm gone. You ain't gotta worry about it. But David's loyal. He's still there. And anyway, he threw it at him twice, and David avoided it twice. So let's look at verses 12 through 16. And Saul was afraid of David, probably because you just threw a spear at him. because the Lord was with him and was departed from Saul. Therefore Saul removed him from him and made him captain over 1,000, and he went out and came in before the people. And David behaved himself wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. Wherefore, when Saul saw that he behaved himself very wisely, he was afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he went out and came in before them. So in verse 16, when it says that they loved him because he went out and came in, it means that they loved him because he was successful in war on their behalf. And so Saul is afraid of David now. We saw that, and he gives him, as we see in these verses, he gives him a bigger and bigger role in the army. Well, essentially what he's doing is hoping that David would get killed by being the leader of these bigger and bigger groups of soldiers. But everything that Saul did to destroy David, hear me clearly, everything, we'll see it in the text. I don't want you to believe me. I want you to believe the text. Everything that Saul did to destroy David actually made him stronger. All right. So these things aren't working so well. So sorry, like he's trying to get him killed in battle. That didn't work. So Saul hatches another plan. Now he decides that he's going to marry off his daughter to David. This is interesting to me because his daughter should have already been given to David because of what happened with the whole Goliath situation and how he had promised that he was going to give his daughter to the person that killed Goliath. And he did. So that just kind of personally made me feel like Saul was just blowing smoke the whole time and didn't keep his word. But we're not going to go down that rabbit hole. So Saul decides that he's going to give David his daughter to marry. And the dowry, because back then they had to pay a dowry to betroth the daughter or the wife. And so he figured that the dowry that he would give David would be so dangerous that it would get him killed in the process. But somehow during this process of this time period, his older daughter that he was going to give David gets married off to somebody else. And so he finds out that his younger daughter, Michal, that she loved David, and he decides to give her to him instead. David, the only thing that he requires is that David go and retrieve 100 Philistine foreskins and bring it back as the dowry so that he can receive her as his wife. Again, Saul is assuming or thinking or hoping that David, this dangerous mission that he sends him on, would get him killed. And you know how we are about the ladies. So, he's hoping that David would go fight and not come back. So David goes, and not only does he bring 100 foreskins back of the Philistines, he actually brings back 200, gives them to Saul, and he takes Michal to be his wife. Let's look at verse 28 through 30 in chapter 18. And Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. And Saul was yet the more afraid of David, and Saul became David's enemy continually. Then the princes of the Philistines went forth, and it came to pass after they went forth that David behaved himself more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that his name was much set by. So his name was he was well known. All right, and that's how chapter 18 ends. Let's move into chapter 19. Hopefully you guys are hanging out with me and sticking with me. All right, so as we move into chapter 19, Saul is still on his murder mission. He wants to take David out. And so his jealousy, anger, hatred, is all that coupled with the fact that the father is no longer with him. The spirit of the father has left him. He's been tormented periodically. Like, all these things are creating, I don't want to say the perfect storm, but are creating an environment where this hatred and this anger is really thriving in the life of Saul. All right. And so let's look at verses 1 through 3. And Saul spake to Jonathan his son and to all his servants that they should kill David. So now you're telling people that you're trying to kill him. But Jonathan's son delighted much in David. And Jonathan told David, saying, Saul my father seeketh to kill thee. Now therefore I pray thee, take heed to thyself until the morning, and abide in a secret place, and hide thyself. And I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where thou art, and I will commune with my father of thee, and what I see, that will I tell thee. So he's basically, is like, hey, dad's upset with you, but I'm going to go talk to him. You just kind of lay low and hang out. And we see through the relationship of Jonathan as well that every time Saul came against David, it continues, or every time he comes against David, it continued to make him stronger and stronger. When Jonathan hears that Saul is going to try to kill David, he goes and lets David know. What does this do? This makes David stronger. This gives David a stronger relationship with him, a stronger bond with him, but also gives him a stronger footing to stand on as he is out navigating this season of where he's on the run, this season of life where he is fleeing from this man. And so he lets David know that he's gonna talk to him and all this thing. And Jonathan goes and he speaks very well of David to Saul. And Saul swore to Jonathan that he would not kill David. He didn't tell the truth, but he swore to Jonathan, his son, that he would not kill David. And so Jonathan brings David back into the presence of Saul. And on the surface, he's back in good standing. But once again, this tormenting spirit comes up on Saul, and David is playing for him again, as he often did. And this time, the text says that Saul sat with his javelin in his hand, and he tries to kill David again. He throws a spear at him, but David gets away again this time. And now Saul, he's on this mission. He knows that he's tried to kill David multiple times in private. He's tried to kill David in public. He's afraid because of all these things he has going on, and so he's doubling down on the death of David at his hands. And so after David flees this time, he sends messengers to David's house, where his daughter Michal also lives, and tells them to kill David in the morning. And again, David is becoming stronger and stronger each time. How do we know this? Because this time, Michal, his wife, tells him about the plan of her father. And McCall lets him down. You know what they say, ride or die. She one of them ride or dies, but McCall lets him out of the window. She creates a little fake David in the bed so it can look like he's in the bed. And when the men come up the next day to try to take him, she tells them that he's sick. And so they go back and tell Saul, the messengers do, and he sends them back and say, hey, bring him up on his sick bed so that he can kill him on the sick bed. And I'm like, man, you really got to be after somebody to carry them to you on a sick bed so that you can kill them on their sick bed. And that's when they find out that that it wasn't really David in the bed. It was just some image that she had set up. And Saul is upset with his Saul is upset with his daughter about what happens. After David is let go, he runs and he flees to Ramah. He runs up to Samuel, the priest, in Ramah, and he tells him what's going on. And Saul hears that he is there, and he sends messengers to the priest. So now Saul is sending messengers to the priest to kill David in the presence of the priest. Like you got to think about the mindset of what Saul is going through right now. That he's really that anger and that fury is being fueled, and like it's just like burning rampant right now. And so let me get back to what's going on. So he goes up to Ramah. Saul sends his messengers up to Ramah. He sends 3 bands of messengers up there, but every time he sends some messengers, they end up getting overcome by the spirit of the father and end up prophesying. And so he ends up coming up there himself. So now he's going to come himself and kill David in the presence of Samuel, which is crazy to me. And when he gets there, the spirit of the father comes on him too, and he prophesies again, and he ends up prophesying naked at the feet of Samuel. So let's look at that in verses 23 to 24 of chapter 19. Now tell me that the Bible isn't interesting, okay? So let's look at it. Verse 22. Then went he also to Ramah, and came to a great well that is in Seku, and asked and said, where are Samuel and David? And one said, behold, they be at Naioth in Ramah. And he went thither to Naioth in Ramah, and the Spirit of God was upon him also. And he went on and prophesied until he came to Naioth in Ramah. And he stripped off his clothes also, and prophesied before Samuel in like manner, and laid down naked all that day and all that night. Wherefore they say, is Saul also among the prophets? And that's how chapter 19 ends, with Saul, pursuing him, and ultimately ended up laying on the ground in the sight of Samuel, prophesying naked because of the how the anger had pushed him to this place. And so as chapter 20 begins, we see that David is still running. He's now fleeing from Ramah because Saul has come there and found him again. And so he sees David. David sees Jonathan, and he asks him, like, man, what's going on with your dad? Why is he trying so hard to kill me? Let's look at that in verse 1 of chapter 20. And David fled from Naioth and Ramah, and came and said before Jonathan, what have I done? What is mine iniquity? What is my sin before thy father, that he seeketh my life? So Jonathan is still a little bit in denial about all this just kind of going on. And he encourages David that his dad isn't going to do anything to him without first telling him. David doesn't agree with that. He feels like Saul knows that they are close, and that he would not tell Jonathan his true intentions. So they devise a plan to see if Saul is actually upset with him. so that David can finally leave for good or not. So he can either, flee for good or stay. And so about that time, it was the new moon, which is like a time of the certain time of the month. And all of Saul's leaders were to gather together for 3 days and have a meal, share a meal together for 3 nights in a row. So David tells Jonathan that he's not going to attend the meal, and he wants him to see how Saul reacts. And so the first day of the meal comes, and David is missing from his spot, and Saul doesn't acknowledge it because he assumes that David is unclean. Second day comes, and David is still not in his spot. And so this time Saul confronts Jonathan and says, hey, where's David? Jonathan gives him some reason like, hey, he had to go back home or whatever. And Saul gets angry with Jonathan and ultimately ends up throwing the javelin at him, throwing a spear at him during the meal. So let's look at that in verses 30 through 33. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said unto him, thou son of the perverse, rebellious woman, do not, now that's your baby mama or your wife, like chill, bro. Do not I know that thou hast chosen the son of Jesse to thine own confusion and to the confusion of thy mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse liveth upon the ground, thou shalt not be established, nor thy kingdom. Wherefore now send and fetch him unto me, for he shall surely die. And Jonathan answered Saul his father and said unto him, wherefore shall he be slain? What hath he done? And Saul cast a javelin at him to smite him, whereby Jonathan knew that it was determined of his father to slay David. And so we see here that Saul is trying to, and still being disobedient to the father, but trying to rewrite the father's will here, because he wants Jonathan. He's saying that he's trying to kill David so that Jonathan can have the position in the kingdom. And while David is around, Jonathan will never have the position. Well, we know that Jonathan can never have that position because the father's already stated that through Samuel to him, through his disobedience. And so now he's trying to force the hand of the father, or force the outcome, by doing things that ultimately were never going to progress him anyway. Saul should have made the better decisions on the front end, but he's not taking any responsibility for his actions. So Jonathan leaves the dinner, and the next morning he goes out, and him and Dave, he goes out and they go through their sign, their agreed upon sign that they had come up with. And ultimately he tells David through that sign that he should flee and hide himself because the father has purposed to kill him. But before this time, they had already made a covenant that David would never remove his favor or his kindness from Jonathan's house. And we see him ultimately keep his word with that down the line, which we'll look at as we move into the next chapter, I believe. And so they remind each other of this as the chapter ends, this agreement and their relationship and their brotherhood in verse 42. And Jonathan said to David, go in peace, for as much as we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord be between me and thee, and between my seed and thy seed forever. And he arose and departed. And Jonathan went into the city. Let's move into chapter 21. So in chapter 21, we see that David is now on the run. He's still on the run, and he enters into a city. It's called the city of Nob, which was a city of priests. And so he enters there, and he's fleeing from Saul, and he goes up to the priest Ahimelech and asks him if there is some bread available for him and the men that he have with him to eat. We also see at some point David amassed a group of followers to take with him or going with him. And so Ahimelech is concerned to see David there, but David lies and tells him that he's there because Saul sent him on a mission or something like that. And they just kind of continue their interaction and not really get too much deeper into it. And so Ahimelech tells David that there's no common bread available, but there's hallowed bread that the men have kept themselves away from women. And so we see, I just said that, but we see that he's not traveling alone. And so David is given this hallowed bread. He's given the show bread from the tabernacle, and he takes the sword of Goliath and he heads out. And while he's there in Nob, he's seen by one of Saul's servants, Doeg. And Doeg, it says that Doeg is an Edomite. So Edomite are descendants of Esau. Understand that Jacob and Esau and the war and all that, and the disagreements that they had with one another. And so, and then Jacob is also the one that ultimately the one that the father entered into covenant with, not Esau. So we see that Saul has surrounded himself at least with one or some servants that are Edomites, or those that are outside of the covenant. And I'm not saying that Edomites are bad. what I'm showing us or teaching us, or I'm trying to share with us, is that Saul has surrounded himself by foreigners. He has surrounded himself, at least in some instance, with foreigners. And we see that he is now doing, we're going to see in a second, he's beginning to do things that are not accepted or not commonplace in the nation, or in those that are aligned with him, or in his heritage, I guess I would say. And so the chapter ends with David going up to a Philistine king. He tries to hide there, but the king, I think he went up to Gath. He tried to hide there, but the king's servants remind him of who he is, and how the people got the song about. Everybody knew about this song. That's probably why Saul was so mad. How they got the song where David, killed 10,000 and Saul only killed 1,000. And so David hears this, and he becomes afraid and acts insane, and then he departs looking for another place to dwell. In chapter 22, it begins and tells us that David and they finally found a place to stay, David and the people that are with him, and they stay for a while in a cave named the cave Adullam. And when his family hears that he's in this cave, it says they came and stayed there with him too, which makes sense to me. I'm not saying this is what the text says. This is me, like my thoughts on it. Is that it makes sense because their lives were probably in just as much danger with Saul acting the way that he was towards David. Their lives were probably threatened as well. And so they came and they dwelled with David. And while he's in this cave, the text tells us that he amasses a following, a soldier, an army, I guess, of about 400 men. It says that they were men who were in distress, who were in debt, who were discontented. And so people who were just kind of out, a little down and out at the time. And these people decide to follow David. And also at this time, David goes to a leader who is in the territory of Moab, which is outside, right outside of the promised land and outside of the Israelite kind of inheritance. Some of the tribes received inheritance in Moab, but it's outside of their original inheritance. And so he goes there to one of the kings and asks one of the kings if his mother and father could stay there and be safe until he figures out what's going to happen to him and what's kind of going to become of this battle, I guess, with Saul. And the king allows them to stay there. And the text says they stayed there the whole time that David was in hiding. And so during this time also, David receives a prophetic word from the prophet Gad. And the prophetic word was that it's time for him to leave the cave and go down and dwell in the land of Judah. So David and his men go up and they dwell in the land of Judah. They hide in the forest of Hereth. And when Saul hears that David is in the land of Israel, he's in the territory of Judah, Saul gets upset with his servants that they are not helping him find and kill David. And then this is when Doeg tells Saul that he saw David with Ahimelech up in Nob within the city of the priests, and how Ahimelech had given him bread and Goliath's sword. And then Saul sends for Ahimelech the priest. And after a conversation, Saul tells his servants to kill Ahimelech and the priest that came up with him. I think it was like 85 altogether. And his servants refused, but Doeg, the Edomite, because he's an outsider, willfully, or whatever you want to call it, he rises up and kills the 85 priests. Now, Saul has completely lost it in this point, in my humble opinion. Not only does Saul have Doeg kill all 85 of those priests that come up, he then sends Doeg and the people, the servants, up to the city of Nob, which was a city of priests. So not only were these priests who are Ahimelech's like family, but now they're killing all the priests of the city. They kill and they devour everything of that city, the cattle, the people, the men and women, like everything. He sends them up there and just takes them all out. And Saul, like I said, he's completely unhinged. There's no reason, there's at no point should he be killing priests because of his anger or whatnot, because of his issue that he has with David. But one of the sons, the text tells us, of Ahimelech, Abiathar, escapes and tells David. And so David allows him to stay with him. All right, let's move into chapter 23. We're getting close, okay? We're getting close. Hang out with me a few more minutes. Give me 10 more minutes. And so chapter 3 begins with David hearing that the Philistines are fighting against the city of is it Kizith? Keilah, thank you. And they're fighting against the city of Keilah, which is in the territory of Judah. And so David sees this as an opportunity to go and have somewhere safe to stay, because this city is a fortified city, according to what the text tells us. And so he asked the father if he should go up and fight, and the father tells him to go. But the men that he had with him, his soldiers, were telling him that they didn't want to go deeper, and they were afraid. They didn't want to go deeper into Judah because they were already kind of on edge in Judah, and they don't want to go deeper. And then Saul find out, and then they end up Saul ends up coming and getting them and killing them all. And so David inquires again of the father, and the father tells him to go up and he will deliver them into his hand. So they go up and they fight the Philistines and they rescue the people of Keilah. And Abiathar, he brings down an ephod to the city, into the city to David. So they are they are at this point like potentially thinking or planning to dwell here. Like this is a place that they can stay and be safe and et cetera, et cetera. And so the ephod comes down there. And so essentially Abiathar would become like a priest to David in this time. So David, he still, to think about that David is on the run from Saul and he's still delivering people. Like he's still fighting and warring for the people. And Saul is out here trying to kill him. He can't focus on his responsibility as king because he's so focused on killing David, who I guess was already anointed king. And so Saul soon finds out that David is in this city, and he's excited because he feels like the father has finally delivered David into his hand, because this is a fortified city that's not easy to escape. So Saul's like, he can come down on David, he can come down on the city, and David won't be able to get away. So Saul loads up and he heads out to get David. And David knows that Saul is coming after him, so he asked the father, is Saul going to come down? The father says yes. Then he asked the father, the people of the city are going to give him over to Saul, and the father says yes again. So David and his 600 men, they leave, and they went wherever they could go to escape, and they ended up in the wilderness of Ziph. And so Saul heard this, and he heard that they had left, and he stopped his mission down to Keilah and turns back around, but he never gave up. Let's look at chapter 23, verse 14. And David abode in the wilderness in strongholds and remained in a mountain in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul sought him every day, but God delivered him not into his hand. Think about that, man. Saul looked for him every day, and that means that David was on the run every day for this season of his life. And so while he's out here in the wilderness hiding, Jonathan comes and visits him. They talk about how David will be king and how Jonathan will be, and Jonathan is the one saying this, how David will be king and Jonathan will be right next to him, and they enter into a covenant together before he leaves. And the chapter ends with much of the same. Saul looking for David, and David hiding from Saul, and David running, and then Saul looking for David in a new place. Let's move into chapter 24 and we finish up for today. And so in chapter 24, this is where things begin to shift, okay? And so as the chapter begins, Saul gathers 3,000 soldiers to go out looking for David in the mountains. So they're going to this mountainous region. They're looking for David. And during this time, they're in the mountains looking. And the text says that like Saul was on one side and David and his folks were on the other side. And so, how long has that been in my beard? But Saul leaves the cave. Saul, let me focus. Saul enters during this time. Saul's people are on one side of the mountain, David's folks are on the other side. And Saul goes into this cave to use the bathroom. It says to cover his feet or uncover his feet or something like that. And so David and his men are also hiding inside this cave as well, but Saul doesn't know that they're in there. And so the men around David, these are the same distressed men, the ones in debt, the ones that are kind of downtrodden. So that's why it matters who you surround yourself with. These men are like, hey, the Father has finally delivered your enemy into your hand. Like, do what you feel is best to him. And so David, like, he's like, well, I don't really want to do anything, but he ends up cutting off a piece of Saul's robe. And this just weighs on him so heavily because he never wanted to lift a finger against the Father's anointed or against the leader that the Father has set in the position for the season. And so Saul leaves the cave and David exits after him, makes himself known to Saul. And he tells him how he spared him inside the cave and how even the Father delivered him to his hand. But even when others told him to pursue, that he didn't. And he made it clear that he has no evil intent against Saul. And but Saul continues hunting him, and he doesn't really understand it. And so after David's done talking, Saul acknowledges that David has shown himself more righteous than him, and asks that David will show kindness to his seed after him, because he finally accepts that David is going to be the king, and that he won't his bloodline will not be, and they depart from each other. So let's read verses 17 through 22 of chapter 24 as we finish up. Okay. Thank you guys for hanging out with me for midweek Bible study this time. All right, so let's look. Verse 17. And he said to David, thou art more righteous than I. for thou hast rewarded me good, whereas I have rewarded thee evil. And thou hast showed this day how that thou hast dealt well with me. For as much as when the Lord had delivered me into thine hand, thou killest me not. For if a man find his enemy, will he let him go well away? Wherefore the Lord reward thee good for that thou hast done unto me this day. And now behold, I know well that thou shalt surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in thine hand. Swear now therefore unto me by the Lord that thou wilt not cut off my seed after me, and that thou wilt not destroy my name out of my father's house. And David sware unto Saul. And Saul went home, but David and his men got them up into the hold. So we see here that Saul and David, as chapter 24 ends, are no longer at odds. They have had a conversation. And Saul finally acknowledges that the kingdom has been given over to David and it is no longer in his hands. Okay. So that's what I got for you guys this midweek study hall. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. Please give us a like, comment, and subscribe, and please comment down your thoughts on the teaching. I know it's a little bit longer, so thank you guys for hanging out with me. And I'll do my best to try to get these try to keep them around an hour or so. But for all those who like to join in or want to keep going with the study, we'll be meeting again Sunday at 8 p.m. as part of weekly Bible study, and we'll be looking at 1 Samuel chapters 25 through the end, and we're going to start into a few chapters of 2 Samuel. So if you want to go ahead and read those and get ahead of where we're going, that's so fantastic. You can go ahead and read the ending of 1 Samuel and read the first few chapters, maybe the first 5 or 6 chapters of 2 Samuel. Okay. And that's all I got. I love you guys. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. But more important than that, listen, the Father loves you. The Father loves you. The Father loves you. Let him love you. Listen to me. Start before you're ready and don't stop. I'll see you guys next time.